A couple of days ago, my boyfriend and I went camping in eastern Germany. We had found an incredible spot to set up our tent, right by a river in the woods. We parked the car about 20 meters away from us, behind a bush. After we set everything up, we sat by the river and enjoyed the sunset. It was getting darker and we could hear the animals around us getting more active. We were well aware that we would hear some creepy noises at night. Anyway, my boyfriend decided to bring our food to the car to not attract any more animals at night. I stayed at our spot, enjoying the view. As soon as he walked to the car, this strange feeling got to me, a feeling of fear and alert. I kept checking on my boyfriend, who jokingly said something like, "Please keep looking after me," which is also untypical for him. Maybe it's worth to mention that neither him nor I are easily scared. We are both tough and had a knife with us too. When he got back to our spot, he kneeled down next to me and said, "I heard something really heavy walking in those woods." I thought he was joking, trying to scare me, but he was serious, and I could see how uneasy he was. He said we should have a look with the knife and flashlights. So we did. About halfway to the car, I could hear some really heavy footsteps. First I thought, oh, well, a deer. But not soon after, I noticed that it clearly sounded like bipedal footsteps. In that moment, I got chills and felt an insane moment of panic. We stood there frozen, staring into the woods. When we moved, it moved. When we stood still, it stood still. It clearly mocked our steps. That went on for 2 minutes. We've had enough. I rushed back to the tent as my boyfriend stood guard with the knife on hold. I grabbed everything valuable and necessary, and we rushed to the car. As I grabbed the stuff, I could still hear it moving in the bushes. As soon as we were in the car, we locked the door and drove off to gain some distance. We parked the car in a parking lot and talked about what just happened. My boyfriend said that when he brought the food to the car, he already had a weird gut feeling of someone lurking. The reason for him asking me to keep checking on him. As soon as he heard the steps, he said he literally got chills down his whole spine. He also saw some sort of vague outline of something, but couldn't identify anything. He's never felt more altered and panicked his whole life. Neither did I. It was pure survival and gut instincts to get away from whatever it was in the bush. We slept in the car that night. Now he thinks it was a creepy human who was up to no good. I think that is a possibility, but that it might be something different. Apart from a human, we do not have any large predators in Germany. My husband and I went camping for the first time ever in Arizona as part of our long trip out west. I had picked out this really cool place that was on a mountain overlooking a beautiful landscape. It's next to a cliff and in a really isolated location. I'm talking like 20 miles out on gravel roads in the middle of a national forest. So we get there, set up our tent and hike a little bit and take pics of the surrounding area. We see a few cars parked around 2 tents and decide to stop and talk to the other campers nearby because we had heard that there was going to be a bad storm that night. There were 4 guys who were from Arizona and they told us not to worry and that the storm didn't get that terrible around this area. That was all the persuading that we needed to stay. Later on, while walking a bit further down the campsite, we see a woman there with her dog and another older lady. We smile and wave and continue to hike down a bit further into the forest. Let me elaborate that because of the storm, we are one among maybe a total of 7 campers that decided to stay and withstand the night. We watch the sunset when we get back to our site, make sure our car was only a few yards away, and go into our tent when it gets too dark to see. There are no stars tonight due to the storm clouds, and it hasn't begun to rain yet. So we decide to try to sleep right away so that we could possibly sleep through the storm when it does hit. It is an insanely windy night, so it is hard to sleep, but eventually we get a bit of shut-eye. I wake up at 10:30 p.m. to the sound of some crazy thunder rolling through the mountains and rain hitting down on our tent. I'm a little freaked out because they get a lot of flash floods out here and I didn't want to fall off the side of the cliff, but I tell myself to try to sleep and eventually I doze off again. It's 12 a.m. and I am awake again, this time because I hear something heavy hitting the side of our tent. Like foolin'. Sounded like someone could have been punching our tent and sliding something down the side of it. I open my eyes and can't see anything. It's completely dark, no light whatsoever. The sound continues every couple of minutes, and at this point I'm shitting bricks. Suddenly I hear footsteps right next to my side of the tent. They are slow but steady. I feel my entire body freeze up. I seriously start thinking about how this is it and I am going to die. My heart is beating so fast that I am certain whatever is out there can hear it, then whatever it is lets out a deep sigh right on the opposite side of the tent. I'm thinking it is a bear and realizing that I might actually have to face this thing. So in a desperate call for my husband's mind-reading powers, I squeeze his hand really hard, repetitively, and he wakes up. Instead of reading my mind, he blurts out, "What's wrong? Why are you squeezing my hand?" Right as he says this, the footsteps stop. I don't hear the footsteps again. So after a while, I break out of my frozen state and tell him what I heard. We decided it may have been an animal passing by. Whatever is hitting our tent continues every so often, and I'm starting to go a little insane from this night. Wondering what is going on, we convince ourselves that it's just pines falling from the trees above us and try to sleep again. We just need to make it through one night, then we can laugh about all of this in the morning. A couple of minutes go by and suddenly the tent caves in on my husband's side. Right on his head. He whispers that it feels like something is pushing the tent down. I feel my heart instantly sink. I'm freaking out thinking it's a bear that just sat on his head, but he decides to push back and we hear the familiar noise of something sliding off of our tent that we've been hearing for the past few hours. We then realize that it's been snowing outside and that the noise we heard hitting our tent was heavy ice falling from the trees onto our tent. Our tent is covered in thick ice and my husband pushes the tent from the inside until all of the ice slides off. Still determined to make it through the night and a little relieved that it was just ice and not a bear, we try to sleep and make it to sunrise. We keep on a small lake that my husband luckily brought with him just to calm us down a little. Things are starting to seem normal again. We both close our eyes. It's 3 a.m. At this point, not even 30 minutes after we are settling down, my literal worst nightmare happens. Out of the pitch black night, we hear a woman screaming. We distinctly hear her say, "What the fuck? Oh my God. What the fuck?" Followed by some other non-tangible words that sound something like help. The way that she screams doesn't sound like anger. It sounds like pure terror and a sense of panic. My husband and I are both frozen, looking at each other. I quickly shut off our light and start panicking and asking what we should do while we are trying to decide what to do. For the next few minutes, we hear her again, but this time she is screaming no as we hear a car speed off into the night. I'm in tears. At this point, we have no idea what is happening. It's dead. Silent now, except for the icy rain hitting our tent. It definitely sounded like she wasn't in the car, but more like she was desperately yelling after it or begging not to be hurt. And this was the breaking point. I could take the bad weather. I could take the possible bear outside my tent. I could even take the ice falling on our heads in one of the warmest states in America. But one thing I cannot and will not ever be able to handle is a screaming person in the middle of the pitch black woods. At 3 a.m., we decide to GTFO up there and even contemplate leaving our tent and booking it to our car. But instead, we try to stay level-headed and grab our valuables and put them in the car first. We frantically gather our things and stay close as we shuffle to our car. I close the door and keep the lights off for a while, scared to attract any unwelcome visitors while my husband goes back to grab the tent. I call 911. I tell them what I heard and where we are, and they say that they are sending someone to the campsite to make sure everything is okay. Only thing is, we are literally in the middle of nowhere and it will definitely take them more than an hour to arrive. Not to mention the storm left those gravel roads in some pretty terrible conditions. We decide to start driving and it's like 3:30 a.m. now. As we drive out of the campsite, my husband notices one last eerie detail that stuck with me. The 4 guys that we had talked to earlier had left. All 3 of their cars were gone while their tents remained. Whatever scared them off, they sure left in a hurry. It was only after we started driving that the thought occurred to me. Whatever was walking next to my tent may not have been an animal. It very well could have been someone lurking around in the dark who decided to go after the girl we had seen previously on our hike. I'm not quite sure what went down on that long mountain that night, and I hope that everyone got out okay. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded yet within a safe distance to civilization that I could run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a plus for me. It's fun to be scared, so I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, then see a dope bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with the armful of wood I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I had been messing with. Around 1 p.m., I decided to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars, so I passed out relatively quick. About 2 p.m., I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or other animal, more likely a raccoon, because I had probably left some food out. I'm still on guard, though, about 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open. I hear a rubbing noise and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't shit my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my crowbar in hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking with me. And then as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure, because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I sure wasn't going to go to sleep all of a sudden. At about 4 o'clock, I realized I should put my boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freak out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down and his finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on. I took off right quick in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl and a wife-beater boxers and steel-toe boots. I also had some blood that had oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I had also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened. They called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and Coke. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car, and what I saw just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky.